sit down as you listen to this. 437 million hectares of Australia is covered by coal seam gas licences or applications.
I lived in Sydney. It was some of the best times of my life. And then I'd hit 30. What did I have? Nothing. I got on the internet and I found some land in Tara. It was called the Tara Estate. The dream was to develop the property and potentially start a family. One day a guy drove down my driveway and said, "I'm Queensland Gas Company. We're going to sink a well down the back of your place, and if you don't like it, there's nothing you can do about it." But our land sat on top of billions of dollars worth of gas, and the industry were going to stop at nothing to get it.
They all say it's safe. I have to live here.
I think nearly every kid in this estate's sick.
There's hydrogen sulphide in the air. That's what's making everyone sick.
Blood just pours out of his nose.
You see your friends like this is when I actually get angry.
There's nobody out there to help us.
I'm the worst environmental activist this world's ever seen, but in the end, it was the only way to get something done.
This coal seam gas industry is like an old car screaming down the highway with bad brakes and no reverse.
I know this land real well, and I know what you can do if you stuff it up.
This is where all the bad stuff is. The burden's on proof, so we've got to start proving. I think what people really need to understand is that gas wells leak. That it's explosive.
Do you think that's a safety issue?
Of course, it's a safety issue.
He's just a total accidental activist.
The government and the gas corporation hate you.
This is the biggest con that has been perpetrated on the Australian people since the asbestos disaster. This is precursor to a major destruction of our area.
I'll absolutely guarantee you that that's not normal.
Ordinary people have got to step up and become heroes.
If we can't stop this, it's going to destroy the world. Let's go, boys, let's go! Your land's unsellable, it's unlivable, it's un-Australian.
I gotta break out.
Welcome aboard, Dayne.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Now, I imagine in your wildest dreams you could never imagine A, that you'd be on the talk circuit, or B, that somebody would have made a documentary film about you when you bought that little block of land at Tara on the Darling Downs.
No, that's definitely came as a surprise when, but what actually happened to us was, a true sort of David and Goliath battle, and the media loved it, and the film industry decided to make a film about it, and, 10 years ago I would never have seen myself as an activist, and even 6 years ago I wouldn't have seen myself as an activist, but it ended up, like I said, it was the only way that I could actually get something done, so here I am.
What was the trigger for you to get really serious about getting behind the campaign to get some answers on coal seam gas in your part of the world?
Well,
what was the trigger?
Well, the unconventional gas industry I thought was really good. I bought the government line. I bought the industry line that it can be done safely, and it's well for this country, and I'm a staunch Australian. I love this country. And what I found was exactly the opposite. It destroyed jobs, it destroyed manufacturing jobs, it was destroying good farming land, it had huge ramifications for our underground water sources on the Darling Downs. We've had over 500 water bores go dry, and there's more to come. And so at that point, you've either got to sit back and be a passenger, or you've got to stand up and do something. And I decided to stand up and do something, and I've not looked back since.
And did you have a background? Were you politically active? Had you been involved in other campaigns about anything before that?
I was a roo and pig shooter. My family have a long history of roo shooting on the Nullarbor Plains. I drove a diesel four-wheel drive. I lived in the country. I was a country boy. I grew up in Bathurst in New South Wales. Hunting pigs in the western region of New South Wales my entire life. So, to say I was a greenie or an activist wouldn't be the truth.
So when you decide that you are going to take on the state government, in this case the Queensland state government, and these gas companies, where do you start? Is there a manual? How did you have a mentor? How did you sort of put together the campaign that snowballed into Frackman?
Well, I think it's really important to understand there is no activist handbook. I know that the live export industry have had an absolute horrendous time with activists and their continual effective attack on a quite a legitimate business and quite a legitimate industry. So that, you make it up as you go along, which puts the activists in a very powerful position, and it makes the industry they're attacking, they must be very reactionary. And government's quite slow to move anything, as we've all probably experienced in our entire, in our lives. So, that's why I see with the live export industry, they've, the fight back to sort of clear your name and to continue on this business has not nearly been up to standards, and the activists have been running rings around you, and it's a battle that you can't afford to lose. And if you lose it, it will affect not only Australia's economy, it will affect everyone's farming, and it'll affect the cattle industry, which I support.
So in a sense, you're saying the battle for that those farmers and those people who are living in your part of where you were living in Queensland is not dissimilar to the campaigns and the battles that other farmers have in other parts of Australia about the right to farm and what happens with companies who want to come onto their land.
That's true. So, everyone looks at activists and they think it's a dirty word. And I'm sure all of you out there have fought for pastoralist land rights and to not have all your water taken away from you. And that makes you an activist, because that turns you, in opposition to what the government want to do. So it's hard to sort of put activists in this little corner, and there's no carbon copy as myself. I'm not, I am actually the typical activist, but it's the bottom 10% that get the run. I work with a lot of people like myself, very intelligent people, very educated people, and very savvy, and that's how we've managed to get things done. In New South Wales, at the start of this year, 60% of New South Wales was under petroleum and gas lease. Yesterday, that was 8%, because we organised ourselves and we organised an effective campaign, and we've rolled it back. Now, the activists are doing exactly the same thing to the live export industry. They are mounting this campaign, and they're just getting rolling. And when they get to full speed, then you'll have a problem on your hands, because you'll have the public turn against you. And there's the bottom 10% and there's the top 10%. They're both unlikable, they're both unreasonable, you can't work with them. It's that 80% in the middle that is very, very important not to lose their support. When I was asking people, my friends, my builders who are tradies and some in the finance industry, what did you think about the live animal export industry? They said they don't support it. And I asked them why, and they said because we shouldn't be sending our cattle offshore to be slaughtered in religious ceremonies. The Australian public are that uneducated about what is happening, when I told them that that's actually not the truth. It's feeding, it's a great protein source, and it's actually a very viable business for feeding a lot of people around the world, and they were shocked. But it's because you have not had your story out there. In 2011, I watched half of that Four Corners program, and I turned it off. I didn't want to watch anymore. But I've not seen your side of the story. I know it, but you don't need to convince me. You've got to convince this 80% of the public. And if you don't do that, the activists right now, they are gearing up and they are getting support. And in 12 months' time, don't think that disaster can't strike again. It can. You must be on the front foot. Be inventive. Be imaginative. Be precise in what you're doing, and plans to combat this. Because if there is no plans, you will. The 2011 could be 2016. It could be 2017. We just don't know. But don't get caught again, because if you get caught again, you will lose the support. The mining industry has lost support of the Australian public. They are now buying, their way into this and here and there, and they're putting politicians in, we've got people that work for Santos now in our Prime Minister's office. That's not a good way to do business, and that's the only way they can do business. You don't want to fall into that category. You want acceptance, and there's only one way to get acceptance is to be honest corporate citizens and do the right thing and be ready and tell people about the great industry that I've heard about here over the last 2 days, because I just haven't heard that in the public, and that costs money. Don't think it's going to cost you $100,000. It's going to cost you $10 million. But you will lose this industry if you are not careful, and I'm not joking. They are savvy, they are smart, they are well educated, and they know how to bring things down.
One of the things that was very clear in your film is that you and your supporters were as pissed off with the process that led to these companies being able to come into your area, aided and abetted by the government and by the regulatory process. You're as pissed off about that as you were about the fact that drilling was going to occur and pumping was concerned. Has it coloured your judgment about sort of politics and the effect that you can have at a local level, a state level, or a national level?
Look, I think it's important that, for me now, I see that there are some politicians, Glenn Lazarus is a prime example in the Senate, Larissa Waters for the Greens. There are some politicians in the Senate who are really talking common sense, and the way they've got there is through politics. Now, you've got Barnaby Joyce, but Barnaby Joyce couldn't stop a Chinese company coming to mine coal on some of the best agricultural country in Australia, the Breezer and around the Liverpool Plains. But they've already opened up one coal mine, so he couldn't stop that. So you need to. I feel that the industry needs to put more of those people up. We had the Nationals, and they've failed us on many fronts, and we've seen some very good independents. Tony Windsor is a prime example, and actually came out of Liverpool Plains. That is a way to break through. Look at the regulations Tony Windsor had put in place for underground water sources. It's absolutely fantastic. So the live cattle industry, you must have your people, your industry leaders stand in the Parliament. Otherwise, you will not have that voice that you need, and one voice isn't enough.
With the profile that this film and the campaign that you were involved in gave you, are you tempted? Are you interested? Have people asked you about getting involved in politics at any particular level?
Yeah, I've been pushed to stand for the Federal Senate in 2016. I'm not entirely sure if that's what I want to do. I'm not sure I want a life of conflict. What I've just been through of 6 years has been, very draining and very taxing on me personally, financially. I'm also looking at local politics. I live in Foster in New South Wales at the moment, so potential local politics there. But look, I'm not decided, but I will definitely have a clear answer in January. And if I do stand as a federal Senate, I definitely do plan to, have the back of the live export industry.
If nothing else, Frackman was a very intensely personal story, your story. It goes into quite some detail about the frustrations, the setbacks you had, and it also went into developing a relationship that you had with a US journalist. Did you know what you were letting yourself in for when you embarked on this particular part of the campaign?
I would have walked off the land if I knew that's what I was walking into. It's not easy to put yourself out there and go against $60 billion industry with government blessing. It's very, very difficult. But nothing ever gets done unless you speak up, unless you want to take that risk. I know the organisers of this event took a huge risk in actually having me here. I know there was some pushback from state governments about me being here. They were worried. But that's bravery on the part of LiveCorp and ALEC to push that. And that's, you know, if you're not brave and you're not willing to put yourself out there, you'll never achieve anything. You'll just be a number, and you put one foot in front of the next. And that's where the live export industry, they need to be leaders and they need to be brave in what they're doing, in putting it out there that, hey, guess what? We have changed since 2011. This has been our improvements. And social media. I'm not saying go into social media and fight with these people, because you're wasting your time. But the people, this 80% that I'm talking about, you must start winning over those people through social media and sticking your neck out.
Did you regret opening yourself up to that extent?
I do. I definitely do. But I think it's very important to make people understand what you go through once the mining industry march, into your neighbourhood and decide that you're a passenger in your own land, it's definitely not been easy. The attacks that I've had from industry and government, and then even coming here, I've blocked 180 people on Twitter in the last month, and that's a live animal export, anti-crew, because they're against me just as much as they're against you. But the reality is, if I didn't open myself up and show that side of what it's like, people would not understand. And what it's managed to do, we've got a moratorium in 2 states. In New South Wales, they've got their hands tied behind their back. There's a few states that are up in the air at the moment, and we'll see.
From a practical point of view, how do you sustain yourself through something? Because it was obviously enormously time-consuming as you sort of read up and got involved in what you got involved in. How was it possible for you to be able to do that?
Well, I had backers. I had people that saw what I was doing. When I first came on the scene, within 6 weeks of being there, I had Liz Hayes in 60 Minutes on my doorstep. 12 months later, I did my first 4 corners. I've done the project. I've had the front page of the Australian. Since the film was released, there was over 600 print articles and over 1,000 online articles. And I've been sustained by people such as the Ainsworth family, who activists are also against. Who are the Ainsworth family, the aristocrat? They make the poker machines. In the very early days, they supported me, and I had merchant bankers supporting me. I had a lot of people who looked into the industry and decided that, hang on, this is actually going to be a huge problem, and this guy's making some headway, and that's how I got through.
Now, anybody who's seen the film will know that it doesn't have a Hollywood ending. Well, to a certain extent it does.
I got the girl.
He did get the girl.
Got the girl, but
well done.
That's about it.
But the coal seam gas industry is just chugging along full steam ahead, certainly in Queensland, and you decided ultimately to cut your losses and accept a payout from one of those companies.
I like to call it relocation, because it's not a payout. If I would have still been there, if the unconventional gas industry didn't come over and destroy the area I lived in. They destroyed it. They industrialised farmland. I moved from Sydney's northern beaches to Western Queensland for some peace and quiet. I went there so I could continue hunting, shooting roos and harvesting pigs. And that was all taken away by the stroke of Martin Ferguson's pen.
Did you come in for a bit of flack, though, from people who accused you of selling out?
Of course, but I was at the point where the glass was empty, and I needed to top the glass up and fight on another day. And it's something that I have to live with on a day-to-day basis, and it's not something that I like, but like I said, it was, for me, we saw the death of a farmer, George Bender, just weeks ago, because he was pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And the only way he thought to get out of it was to go to the shed, get a cup of poison and drink it. He killed himself.
You've got to put a bit of space between that episode now and your life in that part of the world. Would you do anything differently now with what you know?
I probably would have gone out harder. We lost the battle in Queensland. We're winning in New South Wales, winning in Victoria, winning in Tasmania. Western Australia, South Australia and Northern Territory are up for grabs at the moment. I know our Northern Australia fund is pushing for the gas industry to roll on through here. But unfortunately, believing everything that you hear and everything you see, I just ask people to do a bit of research into and ensure that you remain in control of your land and your destiny.
Now, when I say you've moved on, you've kind of moved on, but you're now sort of involved in, I guess, what might best be described as indirect activism rather than direct activism. So instead of cutting the fences and digging your way in, you're going through the front door of a lot of these
direct.
companies.
It's direct in a way. We've moved 10,000 customers away from a company who's drilling for coal seam gas. They're an energy supplier. We've moved 10,000 customers away. I've moved over $100 million in superannuation away from companies that support this industry. And that's the type of activism that I'm now engaged in. And many of you may or may not know, there is a food brand such as the halal certification that will be around mining and food. There's reverse osmosis water from some mining in Queensland that's going on fodder and it's going into our feedlots. And that will not get our certification. So this is happening while you're all talking about growth and this is all happening now, and you're not in the conversation. You're not even in the same game, and it will come back and bite you in the backside. The corporate activism is the new black. That is how these things happen. There's companies now that you look at what Allianz did 2 days ago. €2 trillion out of coal. €2 trillion. Divested. They took it away. Why? Because of the pressure that has been put on them by people around the world who have had a gutful of it. And it's the same thing with this food production. This certification is coming. It is coming. And if you're not ready for it, it could be another real, kick in the backside for an industry that I think should go ahead.
Dayne's quite happy to take some questions from the floor if we can get some microphones to people who would like to ask him a question. Just shoot your hand up and...
That's what I like.
We'll ask you. Yeah.
I hope we covered everything. Look, I think instead of questions, I think I'd just like to really try and make the industry understand that there's not a clear decision right now in the Australian public's eyes. It could go either way. There could be another 2011 around the corner. I don't know. We don't know. But I think the industry needs to do a better job of telling your side of the story. I had to search for live export, and all I found was Animal Australia, RSPCA, the front page. Right at the bottom, there was one story on the MLA. That's it. I had to go back a few pages before I even found your side of the story. If I have to search for it, you're not doing a good enough job. You haven't even bought the Google, the top search to tell your side of the story. And I'm only saying this is because I feel that this industry has the huge potential for this country. From all the way, south, west, everywhere. We can make this work, but we have to make it work. It's not going to fall into place on its own.
And do you sense that that social media is an important part of people, the stakeholders in this industry, telling their story?
It's what destroyed the unconventional gas industry in 3 states. It destroyed it. By social media, savvy social media. And people do it because they feel it here and here. It's nothing to do with the wallet, not making any money of it. They do it because they want to do it, because they believe in their head and in their heart that they're fighting for the right thing.
What about the mainstream media? I mean, did you find after a while there was a bit of fatigue set in, that they sort of thought it's this bloody idiot again?
Yeah, probably said at the start as well. Yeah. But, I think there's always a story to be told. It's just whether people want to listen. There's always articles every single day on the issue.
And you said the key to the success is finding that middle ground. capturing that 80% of people who are not informed enough, but if they were, might have a slightly different opinion?
It could change the way this industry operates. You know, when I'm talking to bankers and to people that I say are really quite intelligent and they don't know about, you know, the issues, all they know is 2011. That's all everyone knows. It's all anyone knows. So it didn't take long to inform them. They're like, okay, great, you just changed my mind. I support animal export now. So it's, you know, it's just one of those situations that needs to be addressed really quickly.
Dayne Pratzky, thanks for joining us at the conference today. He'll be around for a little... Oh, we have a question? We do.
We have a question.
Very good.
Great.
Scream out. Very good. Just give Dayne the courtesy of saying who you are and where you're from.
Sure, thanks. Gordon Stone from Toowoomba in Queensland. Dayne, a couple of questions/observations. I'm interested in your concept about the food certification that you mentioned in passing. And I guess the second comment, question, or whatever it may be is, what would be the messaging that you're talking about that would set this industry apart? And the thing that goes through my mind is, for example, is it about protein for people in developing countries? Thanks.
I'll go backwards, forwards. Education. You know, protein. From what I've learnt here over the past few hours today, you know, from what Temple said, everything that she said in her presentation, everybody needs to hear that. So how you message that is obviously through a very savvy campaign that needs to be run by professionals. But you know, I was convinced before I came here, but after hearing Temple speak, I was actually amazed that she thought that our industry was actually top-notch, because the rest of Australia don't think that. So it's one of those situations that that I think that, you know, really needs the attention of professionals and social and media professionals. And sorry, the first question revolves
about the certification.
Certification. So the certification, it started off with the dairy farms, because what's happening is, and I know Alex is going to kill me for this, but there's some coal seam gas industry are using produce water. They're putting it through a reverse osmosis plant. They're putting it through a pipeline, and it's being used as fodder. That fodder is ending up in feedlots. So I don't want to eat that food, because I know that the dangers, you know, radioactivity, the heavy metals in the water. I know all that. I don't want to eat that food. So I was one of the ones that helped to sort of, you know, get this happening. So it's basically going to be a clean food certification, because there's so much of this country that was undermining, and there's mining underway in that area, that people don't want to eat that food that's contaminated. It's like I don't want to eat, you know, cattle that have been fed GMO corn. It's quite simple, and it's exactly the same thing. People don't want to eat cattle that have been fed mining byproducts.
Question over on the stage right.
Alex Chen from Silk Road Pacific. My question is actually on the radioactivity side of things. Who did you use or to give you a count of what radioactivity comes from the fracking?
So what we first did is we used just a Geiger counter at the start to okay, I thought, wow, okay, so there's obviously an issue here, and then from there we collected the water, and the water guys who tested that water said yes, there is 100% radioactivity in the coal seams, and that's not shale. Shales has far more issues with that, and that's been proven in Pennsylvania and in Dimmick in Colorado, you know, all around the world, that there is radioactivity in this industry. In that industry, sorry.
Okay, second question. Just for the record, how much were you compensated per hectare?
That's actually, and this is why a lot of people don't hear about this. I'm not even allowed to say this, and I'll probably get, you know, I'm putting myself at risk out here, but they make people sign a confidentiality agreement, and I was forced to sign a confidentiality agreement. And that's why you don't hear about these horrendous things that are happening in the Darling Downs in Queensland, because we are forced to sign confidentiality agreements. Otherwise, you sit there and suck it up.
But in other words, you were paid. You were paid.
I were paid.
You were actually paid.
Yeah, he was paid.
I was relocated. And there's a time limit on that, which I can't talk about. You know, this is what they do to you, but it will come out at some point when the conditions are over. But yeah, that's the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question over to the right.
Dwayne, thank you very much for a most enlightening presentation and answer to questions. My name's Andrew Niemeyer. I'm from a company called Charter Air, excuse me, flying animals around the world. I'm just wondering, what concerns me, and I'd like your comments on how this fracking business, what are the dangers to the water tables?
You know what, I'm happy to answer you in the foyer, but you know, the organisers of this event have been under a lot of pressure from a lot of people. And it's about me and mining. You know, I'm actually here to talk about activism, and I would really love to and anyone who wants to talk about mining, please approach me. I've got a card. I'm happy to talk more in depth, but out of respect for the conference organisers, I will, you know, we'll pull back on that one if that's okay. So if there's any questions about activism and how that affects you guys, I'm really happy to answer them.
Hi, Dwayne, Joe Bloomfield. The way I see your activism was more of an environmental viewpoint. Ours is an animal welfare mostly, and we face people who really don't give a shit if we go broke or whatever. They don't associate with us and they don't see us. They think we have vested interest, and I mean, to a point, I agree with them. Just wondering how you deal with the negativity of, I don't know if you would have received such negativity because you were looking on a populist view, but we're not. Yeah. People think we benefit from animal cruelty from the point of production right through, and they think that we don't care. And what you have to do, there's that 10% down the bottom you will not change. You will not change their views. They want everyone to go vegan and, you know, run their cars on honey and love. They're not reality. So, you know, mine was more of I know it looks like it was an environmental activism, but it was more along the lines of standing up as an Australian for Australia, for our rights as landholders to have a say on what happens on our land. So that was, you know, one of the real pushes for me, and the animal export activists and the mining activists are completely different sides of the fence. Completely different sides of the fence. I don't, you know, there are people that I work with that are animal activists, but majority of them aren't. So it's very, very important that we separate those guys. So it's a difficult question to answer, really, but at the end of the day, you have to control the narrative. Right now, they're controlling the narrative. I controlled my narrative. The Aussie bloke being kicked while he was down and stood up. Now, all I'm hearing is you guys, exactly what you said. You're profiting off animal cruelty, when I know that's not true, but Australia doesn't know that's not true. So that once again, it comes with this image that you guys need to really, really work on, and really work on it quickly. And I don't think it needs to come from one body. It needs to come from across the board. A lot of you must have Twitter accounts. You know, I want to know about it. I want to know what you're doing in the bush. I want to know how it's going. And that is the way you'll win over these people, and you'll nip that argument. You know, you'll take it out of the equation, because you know as well as I know, you know, damaged animals and mistreated animals don't make good meat. You know, it's a lose-lose across the board. So once again, that comes down to you guys doing standing up for yourselves, basically. You got to don't argue with them. You don't have to argue with them. You've got to
you've got to put your case across and people will take a side.
Look, as luck would have it, we've actually scheduled a session a little later in the afternoon which is going to look at the mediums and it's going to look at some of the messages that this industry can project, is projecting, and possibly should have projected. So, yeah, it may help address some of the suggestions that you've made about being slightly more proactive in the storytelling sense. But for now, thank you very much for your questions. Do we have time for one more? Don? Good. Is there another question? Okay, yes, where you go.
David, good afternoon. My name is Tony Hoey, and I enjoyed your presentation, your story this afternoon. As a very long-standing associate member of the Australian Live Feeders Association, you made a point just earlier there when you referenced reverse osmosis and the fact that water contained or potentially could contain contaminants in the point of heavy metals. That water goes to irrigate crops. Those crops or those forages are harvested and then they're sold to feedlots. Feedlots use them and you won't eat the meat. That was your statement. I think you should make it clear that any person here who's involved in the Australian Live Feedlot Association that's registered or certified has a strong level of protocols by which they actually take those feed ingredients and do an immense amount of analytical work to make sure that those feeds and feed ingredients meet the criteria to be fed to the animal.
But that's not,
and as a supplier to that industry myself, I mean, we do spend an enormous amount of money per annum to ensure that what we supply to those animals meets that criteria. And I'd just like to make that point clear. So, you know, you in your public domain, and when you're talking to the industry and other bodies associated, please understand that from an office perspective, we do take that contaminants and that potential contaminants very, very seriously.
Look, would that sort of accreditation be useful, do you think?
Very much so.
Yep.
Very much so. We make a big point to ensure that too, sir.
I have lots of, two really good friends who run huge feedlots, and I know the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis with the getting cattle certified and food certified, but a lot of this food is just put into the food chain. It's not, unfortunately, and it's been used in areas, and I'm not even going to say what areas because obviously I'm not here to upset anybody, but it is a concern that is coming up. Sure. And it's something that you guys, as once again, here we go. So are the Feedlotters Association going to sit back and wait for it to land on their lap?
No,
or are they going to get out
by ensuring that they have in place the select protocols and quality assurance in place and adopting those protocols and assurances to ensure what they're putting out there is meeting the requirements. As Mr. Mars knows through his operation at JBS, the amount of work that company will put towards ensuring those feeds, those feed ingredients and those finished products make the criteria that we're selling on.
So that's your narrative right there. That's your story to tell and that's your story to sell. And that's, hopefully, I'll hear more about in the coming years.
And if you can help us along the way, we would appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody, for your questions. Dayne, Pratzky, thanks very much for your time today. If you haven't seen the movie, see it. It works on lots of different levels, and I think you've had a bit of an insight into how Dayne came to star in it. So Dayne will be around, and he'd be happy to continue the conversation. And there's some people, obviously, who've got particular questions, detailed ones they'd like to put to him. But for now, please thank Dayne Pratzky.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.